for what is right. Live for what is right. Beg you do what's right. Kiss them on. Kiss them on.
The state of freedom, the power to choose. God so made us that the Lord refuses to overstep that natural attribute, a domain that He instilled in the human being, the power to choose, the state of freedom. So let us look at some of the subdivisions of innate freedom, or how freedom works within the human being. One, we have free will, and free will gives us the power to think. I want to think about this idea. I want to think about that. I choose to think this. You use your mind. You choose to engage in an internal discourse. You read a book and you think about it. Or you see something and you think about it. You hear something and you choose to think about it or to believe it. So there is the thought process. And the human is in control of the thought process. Of course, there's sometimes that a person is compromised by mental illnesses and so on and so forth. But I'm speaking about the natural, the innate ability. We have the power to think. We have the power to think about something. That is one. And what do we want to think about? We also have the power. I'm not going to think about that. A man sees something and he said, that is inappropriate. I'm not going to think about that. A man sees something and he said that I want to think about that. And so he lends his mind to it. The power to think. And you choose to think. So that is freedom of thought. Free to think. Two, the capacity to say. So something might be going on and you could say something about it, or you have something inside of you that you would like to express. But you have to decide. So he decides, she decides, I will say something, or I will not. Why didn't you speak up? We have this old saying, silence means consent. Why didn't you speak against the evil of your day? Why didn't you speak about what was going on in the classroom? The teacher wasn't there. They were jumping around. Now the teacher returns and you're all reprimanded for misbehavior, for not doing the work. But you say to the teacher, I didn't jump around. And it's confirmed, he didn't jump around, she didn't jump around, they sat down. But why didn't you say something? I should have, but I didn't. Choice. So you're free to think and to choose to think. Freedom to think, freedom to say. Or the power to choose to think about something and the power to choose to say something. Those are the first two. Third, the power to premeditate or to decide on something, or to think about a course of action, and to decide one is going to take a course of action. That is 3. And 4, to literally carry out the course of action, or to act. So 3 would be you think about something that you want to do and you decide you're going to do it and how to do it. And then 4 is to actually do it. So decide about an action, and 4 to carry out the action. So those are 4 domains of free will, innate freedom. And humans build society, build civilization, build country. So within the context of a community, larger organizing of humans, organization from your families, our homes, schools, religious groups, clubs. Then we have businesses and so on and so forth. From that we build a society. We have a civilization when it becomes complex. We have cities. We have a nation. All by human beings. State of freedom in the second level, therefore, a second area, has to do with how we organize ourselves to exercise our free will. So, the Soviets, they built their nation around the idea of sharing, the Marxist concept. We will not allow, or we will not have a country where some have too much and others have none. Then you have the other extreme to that, would be the democratic nation, and it depends on how far to that end you would like to go. Some speak of the ancient Greek society where they had total democracy. Then you can have we have the American democracy, where the founding fathers of the American state created a state with a form of democracy with checks and balances to ensure that there was fairness representing the people. So Congress, all the dimensions of government were to ensure that the nation benefits the people, and that you don't have a demagogue, for example, what Hitler became, Mussolini became, Napoleon became, somebody who has all the power and the people have no rights. So you have the American version of democracy. You have the Greek version of democracy. And although you can look back at the Greek version of democracy and the American version of democracy and all that in between, the forms and the modifications of these two, we can look first at the Greek form of freedom and say that it was still selective, because slaves were not free, women were not given the same freedom and rights as men. So it was for the Greek men. The Greek men had the total freedom. What about women? What about the slaves? And how about those who are not considered as pure Greeks? So then there are flaws. There were flaws to Greek democracy. Is it democracy? Is it true democracy when there are people who don't get to share in it? And as they come up to American democracy, when the founding fathers said that all men are created equal, were they talking about all men as in every human being, or all men as in white human beings? These are issues that scholars, historians, law experts, judges, lawyers, and others have debated over the years. Is it all men are created equal as in all human beings, or all Europeans? Certainly, for the earlier part of the United States of America, as recent as in the 1960s, demonstratively, American democracy pointed to all men being European, meaning blacks were not given right. In 1857, the Supreme Court of the United States of America ruled that descendants of slaves could never be American citizens. But of course, we have the Civil War that ended slavery, and we have the amending of the Constitution to rectify these errant or dehumanizing suggestions or realities that existed in the United States of America. And by the amending of the Constitution, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment to the Constitution, these amendments to the Constitution of the United States of America ensure that African Americans, and all Americans for that matter, would have a share in the American pie, or would be free American citizens. In other words, the amendments and the corrections and the legislation over the years ensure that we the people meant all Americans, and all men are created equal, being all human beings. So I don't have great problems with the United States of America as far as the constitutionality of freedom is concerned. Because if you look at the history, if one examines the history of the United States of America, what we find is that America is always bent and climbing towards justice and true democracy. I must commend the Americans over the years for their stubbornness to get it right. America has been criticized often for the legacy of slavery or of earlier discrimination. We see where you have slavery, then you have Jim Crow, segregation, then you have the unfair opportunities, or how things were laid out in the country to favor whites, and they call that white privilege. Many whites today detest that notion of white privilege because they say we did not enslave blacks, and we are not the engineers. We were not the engineers of Jim Crow and the dimensions to institutionalized, culturalized, cultural discrimination and racism. So from that perspective, it is unfair to hold present white Americans accountable for slavery when both the slaves and the slave masters are dead. Segregation, when those who were the engineers, the architects of Jim Crow are dead, and those who were oppressed by it, they're dead for the most part. And especially when the United States of America had put in place corrective measures to ensure that what blacks were robbed of, they get or have an opportunity to. One of the most vivid examples of this is affirmative action. You have the proponents for and the opponents against affirmative action. There's a lot of scholastic work have been done, debate by judges, Supreme Court justices, by lawyers over many years as to whether the evidence point towards affirmative action being good for African Americans and the American society, or does it perpetuate the race problem or the opportunity problem, or perhaps create even a new level of hostility in whites who might say, my son, my daughter, my father, my cousin should have had that opportunity, but because of affirmative action, it was given to a black person. Is that justice?
Stand for what is right. Live for what is right. Beg you do what's right. Christian man.